For the past few days since they released the new Crucible patch, I've been trying to do an archer build. In this new update, they introduced new stats when you enchant bows. So with this new stats, I really wanted to do a bow build focusing around the cone shot rune. Now I've successfully made a build that does really well in the entire Crucible. It has good mobility, insane damage, the best armor that I could find in the entire game, and probably the maximum focus and health gain that you can get when dealing damage. You may ask, what is the problem? Why haven't I released this build? Well, it's because of this. The bow is bugged when fighting the final boss, the Echo Knight. I've done multiple runs trying to beat the boss, and every time when I use the bow, the frames don't just drop, but completely freezes my screen and I'm just seeing pictures. Then I die without being able to do anything. You can see that the bow initially does a lot of damage to the boss, but I can't finish him because of this bug. At first I was thinking that maybe it's the fire element on the bow that is bugged. So I then went back into the dungeon with different weapons that I had fire element, and none of them froze my game. I've tested this with all the elements, and the bow is the only one that freezes my game. Now I'm also seeing some frame drops when you get flashy echoes that visually changes the game, like the exploding enemies or the lightning strike from above, but it's nothing so extreme like with the bow. This is a huge performance issue that they really need to fix. Now I want to talk about the entire patch, because this game has a huge potential, but this last Crucible patch I strongly believe they messed it up. The new Crucible looks amazing. The art design of it is really giving me that dark fantasy. The old Crucible was more of a medieval dungeon, but now I'm really feeling the Dark Souls-like vibe from the game. But I think that the rewards and the final boss are bad design. The lore of the Crucible is that it is a training ground for the Serim.
I think I know what this place was. A training ground. The ancient Serim built it to hone their skills as they fought against the plague. See, each of these statues will lead to a gauntlet, stitched together from different times, places, dreams.
But now, the dungeon doesn't give any experience, and the item drop is lower than before. You can only get chests with good loot at the end, after you beat the final boss. And the final boss, the Echo Knight, now has infinitely more health and higher damage to a point. It's just a big sponge. I'm seeing lots of players, old and new, struggling and complaining about the new Crucible. They either have the problem of not being able to level up, or for seasoned players, the boss now feels just a tedious hassle. For new players, I'm seeing they struggle after level 15 because the enemies in the world barely give experience. The old Crucible gave us a good way to get experience and was also giving us a very good way to farm money. The Crucible enemies used to give lots of loot that you could have sold and get 5 to 10 silver per run just from the loot, even more from the end chests. The Crucible was a good way to farm experience, money and good items to equip yourself in order to face the final boss. Now the new Crucible design looks nice, but the rewards that it gives it is almost impossible for new players to progress through it. Unless they farm for days and days in the game world and do lots of bounties and challenges to level up. This doesn't feel satisfying, and it feels like it's punishing new players who are attempting to beat the Crucible. Now I said that the Crucible gives the Dark Souls-like vibe, but again, this is visually, as game mechanics it now falls flat. The enemies now have lots of health and damage, especially the final boss. It doesn't feel like you are battling strong enemies where you used to dodge roll and outmaneuver them. Now the only way to efficiently beat the Crucible is with a very endgame tank build, or a build that is maximizing your damage and health gain on damage dealt. It's like the game designers went, let's make it harder but also duller. It's like fighting a brick wall that can occasionally punch back, tedious and frustrating. I've tested multiple old builds, and mages in particular have a way harder time than before. As now even with the highest damage weapons or runes, you barely do any damage to the final boss, making this a long and tedious fight. Now the game always had elements of both Diablo and Souls-like games, but with this new patch it now feels more like a modern Diablo game. I mean, just look at this rogue build I've made where I stagger the boss completely. He can't even attack me, and it still doesn't feel satisfying because he is basically a big sponge. His health is so big now that this entire fight feels disappointing and tedious. I like the new mechanic that the echoes bring, but even with them, even if I chose only the damage ones and get to an insane amount of damage, the end boss still absorbs my hits forever. I think increasing the health of a boss is a very bad and lazy design. They could have left the boss stats as they were, and maybe give him a few more moves in order to outmaneuver you. Or they could have made the boss more aggressive, so you don't have time to only spam the attack and make you dodge roll more. Maybe give him a random element damage every time you encounter the boss instead of just boosting his overall damage. This way you could focus on getting better resistance to certain elements. And the stagger is simply insane. They really need to give a stagger cooldown or resistance, so the boss doesn't get infinitely staggered by your attacks. These are a few things that I can think of to improve the overall boss fights. For the rest of the dungeon, they really need to give better rewards. Put a chest every 2 levels with some materials or gear. And especially, they need to make the dungeon give you experience. Again, the lore of this Crucible dungeon that they made is that this is a training ground for you, the serum, to grow. How can you grow when the dungeon doesn't reward you with experience and gear? I mean, let's say gear is something you can get if you are good and can beat the final boss. But the experience? Why did they decide to remove the experience in a dungeon that the sole purpose is to train you?
I think I know what this place was. A training ground.
The only good thing about this patch is the new Exalted mechanic. This is a huge new addition, and a very good one in my opinion, as this can maximize the stats of your entire gear. This is not only for the weapons, but armors and rings as well. To exalt gear, you need to go to the middle of the Crucible dungeon and talk to the new NPC named Seneschal. You can collect Gloam Seeds through the dungeon and unlock new mechanics like the respec option or the Exalted mechanic. But that is midway in the dungeon. There is no need to even try to beat the entire dungeon, just farm half of it. Even though the echoes give a new dynamic to the combat, the progression of the dungeon doesn't feel rewarding at all. And the end boss rewards are legendary weapons. The problem is that all the Legendaries weapons in this game are bad. Even the common weapons with 4 gem slots can outscale the legendary weapons in damage and efficiency. You can use the Legendaries, but they feel more like trophies than actual weapons. I will probably do a future video showcasing all the legendary weapons and compare them to the rest of the weapons. If you are interested in that, consider subscribing and keep an eye out for when I post it. Now I have other problems to address in this patch. Firstly, I've tested most of the stats in this patch and I'm happy to say they fixed the attack speed. We can finally see a bit of difference when you equip attack speed gear or get attack speed echoes, but stats like knockback resistance and stagger don't work at all. I don't even know why these stats even exist when you already have the poise stat. Typically, the poise stat in Dark Souls games or RPGs in general affects how difficult it is for a character to be staggered or pushed back. The higher the poise your character has, the more difficult it is to knock back them. So basically the poise should affect the stagger and knockback resistance. But in this game we have them as separate stats. And even worse, we don't have the stagger and knockback stats in the character menu, only the poise. I have enchanted armors, pants and gloves with these stats, and I don't see any difference having them on or being naked. The elements are also still confusing even though they finally added description to runes, giving you more information on what they do. What I mean by confusing is that we still have runes that do elemental damage, but don't take your weapon elemental. Now, so far from what I've tested, if you have elemental damage on your weapon as a stat, like fire damage or plague damage for example, this damage will only apply to basic attacks. It will only increase the damage of your normal hits, not your rune damage. Even if the rune description says it will do lighting damage for example, and you have lighting damage increase on your weapon, the rune will not take that lighting damage into consideration. The only stat that increases your rune damage, no matter if the rune has element damage in the description, is the damage increase stat. Even more confusing is that some runes like the spin attack or twirl dash or cone shot will take the weapon elemental damage into consideration. They will increase elemental damage if you have it on your main weapon as stat. Why do these runes work with element damage and the rest don't? This is also not specified on the rune description, making it all more confusing. I know it works with elementals. I just don't know or don't understand why. It might be a bug, or it might be a special feature of these runes. They really need to give us precise information on this. I love this game. It has a huge potential to become a classic that players will play for years and years. The developers have listened to the community feedback and improved the game little by little. I understand why they changed the Crucible like this. The echoes and the Exalted mechanics are genius, but eliminating the experience gained in the dungeon and boosting the health of the enemies instead of making them more aggressive or giving them more movements, it's just boring game design. The dungeon also suffers in terms of rewards. There is no point to even getting to the final boss as he is not rewarding enough. I've also seen even more new stats being added now, like armor increase at low health, armor increase at full focus, and damage increase at full focus. Honestly, I think they should have focused on fixing the bugs and the broken stats before focusing on the endgame. They should first have a good working system of all the mechanics in the game before adding new ones. And that's it. If you liked this video, consider subscribing, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments.